The blast doors of the Ashen Vow buckled inward, glowing white at the seams, and Commander Reya Okonkwo-Lin pressed her palm against the cracking metal as if she could hold back an entire battle fleet with willpower alone. 50 seconds until hull breach, said the ship's voice, flat and calm, the way machines always were when everything was falling apart. Behind her, 300 Velkari refugees huddled in the cargo hold, silver-skinned, four-eyed, trembling in a way their species had never trembled before humans arrived among the stars. Children clutched at elders. Elders clutched at nothing, because there was nothing left to hold on to. Reya turned to the young Velkari commander beside her, whose name translated roughly to Thess of the Low Tide, and whose eyes were wide with something between terror and disbelief. "Your people warned mine," Reya said. 11 years ago. You didn't have to. We were nothing to you then, strangers who'd just learned to walk between stars. Thess didn't understand. Not yet. Not until the Ashen Vow's single working engine screamed to life, and the ship began to move. Not away from the collapsing debris field, but directly into it. Human pilots threading a corridor of destruction that no Velkari navigational computer would have dared calculate. "What are you doing?" Thess shouted. "Paying you back," Reya said, and for the first time that day, she smiled. But to understand why 300 lives now depended on a species the galaxy had once dismissed as clever animals with good manners, we have to go back. 3 days earlier, and 11 years before that, 11 years ago, humanity had just begun crawling out of its own solar system, uncertain, unarmored, and desperately outmatched. The great powers of the galaxy, the Galactic Assembly, the Corvath Dominion, and a dozen lesser factions, had barely noticed Earth's arrival. When they did notice, most simply catalogued humans the way a botanist catalogues a new species of moss. Interesting but irrelevant. The Velkari were different. A quiet, cautious people who valued patience above ambition, they had detected something the other powers missed. A Corvath scouting fleet quietly mapping the edges of human space, preparing for a resource evaluation that was, in truth, the opening move of a conquest. The Velkari owed humanity nothing. They had never spoken to Earth. They had no treaty, no alliance, no reason to risk anything. And yet an old Velkari courier named Doss of Many Rivers made a choice that would ripple across a decade. He flew 3 weeks through contested space, alone, in a ship never designed for war, to deliver a single message to the fledgling human colony on Proxima Outpost 7. "You are being watched by those who mean you harm. Prepare or perish." He never explained why he'd done it. When human diplomats asked, he only said, "Because no one warned my grandmother's people, once, and they were erased." That warning gave humanity 4 months to prepare defenses that shouldn't have existed yet. 4 months that saved 11 human colonies from a war they weren't ready to fight. Doss died 2 years later, of natural causes, having never asked for anything in return. Humanity never forgot. 3 days before Reya Okonkwo-Lin stood in a collapsing ship, she had been sitting in a quiet debrief room on Earth's lunar shipyard, reading an emergency transmission that made her blood run cold. The Velkari homeworld cluster was under siege. Not from the Corvath this time, from something worse. A rogue faction calling themselves the Ashfall Concord, led by a ruthless tactician named Van I Thresh, had discovered that Velkari space sat atop a resource vein of crystalline hexalite, the rarest fuel source in known space. I Thresh didn't want negotiation. He wanted extraction, and he didn't care how many Velkari lives it cost. The Velkari fleet was old, peaceful by nature, they had never built for war, and now they were paying for it. 3 of their outer colonies had already gone dark. The Assembly Council, cautious as always, debated for 6 hours about jurisdiction, precedent, and risk before deciding to do nothing. Humanity did not debate for 6 hours. Fleet Admiral Okonkwo-Lin, Reya's own mother, a woman who had fought in humanity's earliest colonial skirmishes, stood before the Terran Defense Council and said only this: 11 years ago, a stranger flew 3 weeks through hostile space to save people he owed nothing. We are not a species that forgets debts. Prepare the Third Fleet. Every officer in that room understood exactly what she meant. The Third Fleet arrived at the Velkari cluster 40 hours later, not as an overwhelming armada, but as 11 ships, fast and precise, built by a species that had learned to fight smart because it could never afford to fight big. Van I Thresh laughed when his sensors first identified the incoming force. 11 ships, he told his officers. The Velkari have hired children. He would not laugh for long. Humanity's tactics were unlike anything the Ashfall Concord had studied. Where I Thresh expected brute confrontation, the human fleet split into decentralized strike groups, using the debris fields of a dying moon as cover, striking supply lines instead of frontline ships, and forcing the Concord fleet to fight blind in its own smoke and wreckage. It wasn't overwhelming force. It was discipline. Precision. The kind of warfare a species learns only after nearly losing everything, more than once in its own bloody history. Still, 11 ships against 40 was not a fair fight, and everyone aboard the Third Fleet knew it. Reya Okonkwo-Lin, then a junior tactical officer, watched 2 sister ships burn in the first hour alone. She did not have time to grieve. She had a mission: locate and extract stranded Velkari civilians from outposts the Concord had bypassed in its hunt for military targets. That was how she ended up aboard the crumbling Ashen Vow, 300 refugees behind her, and a battle fleet closing in from every direction. Back in the present, with the ship threading impossible gaps between shattered debris, Thess of the Lautide finally understood. "You're not just here to rescue us," Thess said, voice shaking. "You came because of DOS." "We came," Reya said, hands steady on the controls despite the chaos outside, "because a stranger once believed we were worth saving before we'd proven anything. We intend to prove he was right." The Ashen Vow broke through the debris field into open space, directly into the path of an Ashfall Concord cruiser 3 times its size. For one terrible second, everyone aboard believed it was over. Then something happened that no one aboard the Concord cruiser expected. 9 human strike craft, hidden in the drifting wreckage for the past 6 minutes, dropped out of stealth in perfect formation and opened fire on the cruiser's engines simultaneously. A maneuver so precisely timed that it could only have been planned before the battle even began. It hadn't been improvised. Fleet Admiral Okonkwo-Lin, watching from the command ship 3 sectors away, had gambled everything on knowing exactly where her daughter's ship would need an exit. The cruiser's engines failed. The Ashen Vow slipped through the gap, refugees intact, and Van I Thresh, watching his flagship crippled by a species he'd called children less than 2 hours earlier, finally understood the mistake he had made. He had assumed humans fought for glory, or resources, or conquest. He had never considered that they might simply be fighting to repay a debt 11 years old, to a people they barely knew, because that was who they had chosen to become. The battle lasted 6 more hours. Humanity lost 2 more ships. The Ashfall Concord lost 9, along with any remaining will to continue an assault against defenders who fought like they had nothing left to lose and everything left to prove. Van I Thresh withdrew what remained of his fleet before dawn. The Velkari cluster survived. In the aftermath, the Assembly Council, the same council that had debated for 6 hours and decided to do nothing, sent formal condolences and offered humanity a commemorative plaque. Humanity didn't need a plaque. Reya Okonkwo-Lin stood at DOS of Many Rivers Memorial Garden 3 weeks later, alongside Thess and a dozen Velkari elders who had once been children when DOS made his lonely journey through hostile space. "He never asked why we would need saving," Thess said quietly. "He simply saw that we did and came anyway." Reya knelt beside the small stone marker, its inscription worn soft by 11 years of rain. "That's the thing about debts," she said. "The good ones you don't repay because you have to. You repay them because forgetting would mean becoming someone you don't want to be." Word of the Velkari rescue spread across a dozen star systems within the month, not because humanity announced it, but because the Velkari would not stop telling the story to anyone who would listen. Species that had once dismissed Earth as a minor curiosity began to ask a very different question. What kind of people cross the galaxy for someone else's war, expecting nothing in return? The Assembly Council never found a satisfying answer, but the Korvath Dominion, quietly recalculating its own ambitions toward human space, found one that mattered far more to their strategists: the kind of people you do not want as an enemy. Somewhere in the wreckage-strewn dark beyond the Velkari cluster, an old Velkari courier's grave sat undisturbed, its stone marker catching starlight the same way it had for 11 years. But now, for the first time, it was no longer a monument to a debt unpaid. It was a promise, kept.